this debate. And I introduced this debate as one of the co-chairs of the all-party parliamentary group on British Muslims. It's a privilege to chair this all-party parliamentary group, and it's something that I take very seriously indeed. Before I became a Member of Parliament in 2019, the year previously, the APPG proposed a definition of Islamophobia. The group undertook widespread consultation with parliamentarians, experts, lawyers, community activists and victim-led organisations so that they could propose a working definition. This was a sincere attempt to give meaning to the word and the nature of what we call Islamophobia. It has since been adopted by hundreds of different organisations and bodies. It was and remains a valuable piece of work. Now, during the 2019 by-election, in which I came third, I canvassed a gentleman called Amir Suleiman. He is and was a presenter on a local radio station, Salam Radio, and he asked me what I thought about the APP definition of Islamophobia and whether this should be adopted by the government. Well, embarrassingly, I had very little to say to him, but I promised that if I was elected, I would become active on this issue. So a general election and several tough interviews on Salam Radio later, I have kept my promise, and Amir is my friend and a tremendous source of advice. I have a large Muslim population in my city, in my constituency, and I see day in, day out the fantastic contribution that Muslims make to life in Peterborough and throughout the whole of the UK. Championing this and pushing it back against discrimination and hatred against Muslims, my friends, my neighbours, please.
Gentlemen, I'm bringing this forward. And I just want to put on record, if I can, Madam Chair, I'm chair of the APPG and Freedom of Religious Belief. On that, there we speak out for those with Christian belief, those with other beliefs, and those with no beliefs. I support the campaign that Donald Gentleman has put forward. I think government should respond in a very positive way, and the same freedom should be there for everyone of every faith in the United Kingdom, not just in word, but also in deed.
Well, can I thank you very much indeed for that contribution? And he'll know as well as I do that discrimination against any faith can have a huge detrimental impact on the outcomes of that faith. So pushing back against discrimination, pushing back against hatred against Muslims, my friends, my neighbours, my city, seems to me like the most natural thing for me to do. And it's something positive I can do as the Member of Parliament for Peterborough. Because Peterborough wouldn't be Peterborough without the contribution of its Muslim residents. Back in 2013, a report published to coincide with the 9th World Islamic Economic Forum in London stated that the nearly 2.8 million Muslims in the UK contribute over £31 billion to its economy and wield a spending power of £20.5 billion. And I see that economic input all the time in my constituency. Hundreds of Muslim-owned businesses, entrepreneurial people, charitable, wealth and job creators, making my city more prosperous. Successful British Muslim entrepreneurs not only contribute to the prosperity of Peterborough and our country, but they contribute to the fabric of British society and act as role models for all of us. Muslims contribute to the social fabric of my city. In Peterborough, like in other countries, we have Muslim doctors and professors, lawyers, journalists, teachers and academics, pharmacists, care staff, charity workers, and those who work in local government. And of course, the thousands working across the private sector. They contribute to our politics, with Muslim councillors in Peterborough representing all three major parties. In the Conservative-led administration, 2 Muslim councillors serve in the Cabinet, and the Mayor last year was a Muslim Conservative councillor. And from the Labour Party, we have some of the longest-serving and respected councillors in our city. In my party, the Conservatives, we have scores of activists and members, the only local branch, I believe, of the Conservative Muslim Network. And considering the recent Singh report, I think we are one of the flagship Conservative associations in the country for engaging with the Muslim community and Muslim members of my party. The APPG also published another report in 2021, which demonstrated the role Muslims have played in fighting COVID-19. Again, Peterborough is a fantastic example of this. Muslim institutions in my city, both charities and Islamic institutions, have shown us what being in this together really means. Those organisations and community activists, like Zilla Hussain, who was awarded an MBE for his community efforts, have had me handing out face masks on busy streets, delivering food and hot meals to those who are shielding, to rough sleepers and the vulnerable, and promoting businesses like car washes offering free service. I've been photographed scores and scores of times across my city with Muslim businesses, Muslims doing good things for everybody in my city. They have brought me, as their MP, into their hearts and into their homes, and during COVID-19 showed the best of all of us. It would take too much time for me to name all the Muslim businesses in Peterborough for what they have done during, in COVID-19. I listed perhaps 30 or so in a previous Westminster Hall debate. They know who they are, and I thank them from the very bottom of my heart. Because I know that this was replicated across the country. But despite this amazing contribution, despite this effort, Islamophobia remains a social evil that has a devastating impact on British Muslims and on wider society. It's not just British Muslims who are impacted by Islamophobia, it's also British society at large, to the detriment of social harmony and social inclusion. In September 2017, the Runnymede Trust published a report titled Racial Prejudice in Britain Today. The report found that 1 in 4, 26% of Britons, admitted to being racially prejudiced. Given that this admission is one individuals wouldn't readily make, this figure may be an underestimation of actual figures. And a poll carried out by Comres in October 2018 found 58% agreed with the statement, Islamophobia is a real problem in today's society, and that's a good thing. And that almost 1 in 2 agreed with the statement, prejudice against Islam makes it difficult to be a Muslim in this country. That's a shocking thing. A further YouGov poll shows in 2018 that around 1 in 4 Britons believes Islam is compatible with the values of British society, and alarmingly, around 1 in 2 believe there is a fundamental clash between the two. Despite the levels of prejudice evidenced in the national surveys, British Muslims continue to rise to high levels of British society in loyalty and belonging and social interaction with their fellow citizens. 93% of Muslims say they feel they belong to Britain, with more than half saying they felt this very strongly. The APPG report on Islamophobia clearly the evidence of discriminatory outcomes faced by Muslims in employment, in housing, education, the criminal justice system, social and public life, and political or media discourse. It contains a number of incidents widely reported in the press in order to demonstrate the breadth of Islamophobia in society. And I'm not going to name all of them because some of them, quite honestly, are just too shocking to describe in a calm and respectful manner. But one did catch my eye. An investigation conducted by The Sun newspaper in January 2018 revealed that the country's top companies that provide car insurance would give far lower quotes to drivers with typical English-sounding names like John Smith, and far higher quotes to drivers with typical Muslim-sounding names like Muhammad Ali. This form of Islamophobia manifests itself in a subtler way than, say, an act of violence. This is institutionalised Islamophobia, and it impacts the lives of Muslims and leads to unequal outcomes. And to make much greater progress in reversing these discriminatory outcomes, we must begin from the point of an agreed definition. Now, in response to the APPG's report in May 2019, the then Community Secretary said that ministers would instead appoint 2 expert advisors to work on a different definition of Islamophobia. And I quote, to get a firmer grip on the nature of this bigotry and division, we agree there needs to be a formal definition of Islamophobia to help strengthen our efforts. And they pledged the government would develop an effective definition of Islamophobia which commands widespread support. Now, initially following this announcement in July 2019, the first appointment was made. Imam Qari Asim, Deputy Chairman of the Anti-Muslim Hatred Working Group, was appointed to lead a process for establishing a definition of Islamophobia. But there has been no second appointment. Imam Qari Asim was appointed for his experience working with a broad range of communities to tackle Islamophobia, including his role as Deputy Chair of the cross-government working group to tackle anti-Muslim hatred. He's keen to begin this work. I've spoken to him. Muslim communities up and down the country are waiting. They're expecting something. They were promised something. This cannot wait. In the absence of any action, the APP definition has been already adopted by scores of councils, and the Scottish and Welsh governments are now considering this. The first question that I was asked when I appeared on Salam Radio shortly after my election was not on the economy, it wasn't on the NHS, it wasn't on foreign affairs. It was when the government were going to complete that work. I shall be on again soon. Please let me tell them that we have at least started this work. My message is clear. Quickly appoint a second advisor, or please tell Imam Kariasim to begin his work. I shall work with him and with the working group to tackle anti-Muslim hatred. I know I speak for other APPG officers and members when I say frustrating is building. A definition has the potential to be a tremendous force for good, and it's absolutely brilliant the government recognise this. It's the first step in a countrywide effort to stamp out this evil and improve outcomes for millions of people across the country. I cannot stand idly by and allow the children and the grandchildren of my constituents face the same discrimination and racism that their grandparents and their parents faced during their lives. Not only can Islamophobia impact lives and outcomes, it holds us back as a country. If Muslim men and women are prevented from being all they can be, this country will never fulfil its potential. Please, Minister, let's begin this work.
Question is that this House has considered the definition of Islamophobia. Sarah Sultana.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It is a pleasure to serve under your chairship. I'd like to begin by congratulating my honourable friend, the member for Bradford West, and the member for Peterborough for securing this important debate. Before being elected, I was nervous about being a Muslim woman in the public eye. Growing up, I had seen the abuse prominent British Muslims were subject to. I knew I wouldn't be in for an easy ride. And today, I'd like to say that I was wrong to be worried. When young Muslim girls ask me what it's like, I'd like to say there's nothing to worry about, that they would face the same challenges as their non-Muslim friends and colleagues. But, Madam Chair, in truth, I can't say that because in my short time in Parliament, that's not my experience. So let me read out a few examples. One person, for example, wrote to me, and I quote, "Sultana, you and your Muslim mob are a real danger to humanity." Another wrote, "I'm a cancer everywhere I go, and soon," they said, "Europe will vomit you out." A third called me a terrorist sympathiser and scum of the earth, and that's sanitised of their unparliamentary language. I have discovered that to be a Muslim woman, to be outspoken and to be left-wing is to be subject to this barrage of racism and hate. It's to be treated by some as if I were an enemy of the country that I was born in, as if I don't belong. It was summed up by these words in a handwritten letter, and I quote, "If you can't stand the racism, perhaps you'd be happier going back to your country of origin, foreigner." Chair, it's worse when I speak up for migrants' rights in support of the Palestinian people or criticise Tony Blair for the war in Afghanistan. One abusive letter said, and I quote, "Our cities are full of Muslims. Send them to Pakistan." Another suggested that I must support the Taliban, all because I'm Muslim and against endless war. Madam Chair, this Islamophobia doesn't come from a vacuum. It's not natural or ingrained. It's taught from the very top. These fires are fanned by people in positions of power and privilege. When a far-right online account targeted me with racist abuse, suggesting that Muslims were an invading army, a Conservative MP replied, not calling them out for their racism by insulting me instead. When our England football stars were subjected to vile racism, in the chamber I highlighted that the Prime Minister had fanned those flames, ridiculing Muslims and black people. And at the dispatch box, the Minister told me to watch my tone. But, Madam Chair, while none of this is nice, I know that the worst effects of Islamophobia and racism are not just in abusive language, it's in policies and political decisions. This Saturday marks the 20th anniversary of 9/11. That horrific act of mass murder cast a long shadow. The war on terror, launched by George Bush and Tony Blair in its wake, set a narrative that too many readily embraced. Muslims, wherever we are, were portrayed as a security threat in need of discipline and suppression. Abroad, this was the background to disastrous wars in the Middle East, where false links were drawn between Iraq and the 9/11 attacks, providing false legitimacy to a war that had more to do with oil than the safety of British citizens. And at home, it meant the erosion of civil liberties of all and the targeting of Muslims in particular, with policies like the Prevent programme, which countless studies and human rights groups have demonstrated discriminates against Muslims. From young girls being referred to the programme simply for choosing to wear a hijab, to a Muslim teen being questioned by anti-terrorism officers for wearing a Free Palestine badge. I knew about this at university, so I too feared about speaking out in class, holding back where I might have otherwise criticised Blair and Bush for illegal wars. Growing up, I might have hoped that things would have been better, but if anything, it's got worse. Today, our Prime Minister mocks Muslims as letterboxes and bank robbers, and far from scrapping Prevent, earlier this year his government announced who would lead a review of the programme. William Shawcross, a man who once said, and I quote, "Europe and Islam is one of the greatest, most terrifying problems of our future." An appointment that led dozens of human rights organisations, including the likes of Amnesty International and Liberty, to boycott the review, saying it was just there to rubber stamp the discriminatory programme. And closer to home, things aren't good either. My party has seemingly welcomed back a man who said Muslims see the world differently to us, that we are a nation within a nation. It has been silent after a Muslim colleague was cleared of vexatious claims and endured 18 months of horrendous Islamophobia. And in a recent by-election, it supposedly had a senior source pit Muslims against Jews, demonising whole communities. Madam Chair, I've always known what it's like to face racism, and through my political life, I've come to better understand this bigotry, to see it in its different forms, and to recognise the need to confront and challenge it wherever it's found. Islamophobia is very real in Britain today. It's something I know too well, but it can't be defeated in isolation. The people who are spreading this hate don't just target Muslims, they target black people, they target Jewish people, they target Gypsy, Roma and traveller communities, they target migrants and refugees. There is safety in solidarity, and it is only through uniting our struggles that we will defeat racism. Thank you.
Before I call Mr Baker, can I apologise to Ms Shah, because I understand she is a co-sponsor of this bill. So if I go to Mr Baker and then I'll come to you, but I do apologise, I was unaware. So I call Steve Baker.
Thank you, Mrs Curry. I was referring to my unremunerated interest as Advisory Board Chairman of Conservatives Against Racism for Equality, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to follow the Honourable Lady because it's a very moving speech that she's just made, and I'm very sorry indeed that she's been treated so very disgracefully. There can be no place at all in our society for the way she's been treated. We can all see how she's been affected by it, and I don't mind admitting that I'm affected by it, watching her report what she's experienced. It's just a disgrace, and absolutely every one of us has an obligation and a duty to stand against such intolerance and hatred in our society, and I certainly will do everything that I can to stand with her despite our occasional differences, to make sure that she is secure and safe in her identity and valued for that identity. For what it's worth, I often agree with her anti-war views too, even as a former member of the armed forces, but that's for another debate on another day. I'm very proud to represent Wickham, where according to the last census, about 1 in 6 of my constituents are British Muslims. Some of my very best friends and supporters in Wickham are British Muslims. I'm very proud to have their support, very proud to go and knock on doors with them, very proud to go to mosque with them, to have meals together and to share and celebrate their faith at all appropriate moments. You know, they are people who very often taught me even about my own Christian faith. So we have a wide and rich variety of institutions in Wickham, including our largest religious institution. Let this be understood in a Conservative home county seat. Our largest religious institution in Wickham is Wickham Islamic Mission and Mosque Trust, which runs a number of mosques across the constituency. WISE We have Imam Ali Islamic Centre. We've got the Karima Foundation educating young people. Sira Today, Jamia Romania, many imams, people who I regard as the most godly and dignified people, capable of teaching us all how we should relate to one another in community. The Council for Christian-Muslim Relations, which has worked extremely hard over many years to make sure that our churches and our mosques come together and share values and share friendship and fellowship across a broad range of issues, and help, crucially, to listen to one another when things are difficult, when there's a matter of international relations or security and so on. The Muslim Communication Forum is always keen to give us their views, and I'm always grateful. And I think this is the crucial point. If we're willing to listen to one another and listen to one another in good faith, we can make progress. And that is what has happened in Wickham over many, many years. I'm extremely proud of the level of integration that we have, the very flourishing relations, which are the product of a great deal of effort. And I want to make something very clear. We've moved far, far beyond what one might call tolerance, where one agrees to disagree and go separate ways. We've moved into deep integration and friendship. And that's something I'm very proud of. But there is something that we cannot tolerate in our society, and that is the kind of anti-Muslim hatred which the Honourable Lady has so powerfully witnessed today. And that's why I too need to say to my honourable friend the Minister, as a Conservative government, we've been in power now for 11 years, we'll go into the next election having been here for 14 years, and I say to him, I've got to go to my electors, 1 in 6 of whom are British Muslims, thousands of whom have voted for me. That's why I'm here. Quite sure if I lost the Muslim vote in Wickham, that I would lose the seat. And I can assure him that people tried extremely hard to try and dislodge me from that perspective. So I say to him that we just do have to represent and value and respect the votes of those thousands of people in Wickham, in Peterborough and elsewhere who put their faith and trust in Conservative representatives. And to do that, we really must define anti-Muslim hatred, Islamophobia. We must have a working definition, one which we can be proud of, one that's not susceptible to exploitation for political purposes, and one which also, I think, it has to be said, respects the equal worth of Muslims, because around the world, there are conflicts which, I'm afraid, are sometimes on religious grounds. As Christians are, Muslims around the world are persecuted for their faith. I think of the Rohingya, I think about Xinjiang. It has to be said, Israel-Palestine is very often seen through a prism of faith. And we mustn't, I just say in passing, we mustn't forget the plight of Muslims in Gaza and on the West Bank as we move between periods of conflict. But something we can do that would be really meaningful, particularly for young people in constituencies like mine, is to say we not only value you, we respect the dignity of your identity in Islam, and we're going to define what it means for people to express Islamophobia. And we're going to say very loud and clear, we absolutely will not tolerate that form of prejudice and hatred. So, really, I think I've probably spoken for long enough. I want to sort of finish, as it were, where I began, by paying tribute to the Honourable Lady, which is not... I know she's not a huge fan of Conservatives, but wherever we've disagreed, I would have thought that every member of this House could agree that every person should be secure in their identity. Islam's one of the world's great faiths, and no member of Parliament should suffer anything approaching what the Honourable Lady has suffered. And I, for one, am extremely grateful to her for speaking as she has today. I'm very humbled by it, and I'm very sorry once again that she's ever suffered anything like it.
And can I just echo those words of this debate is much richer for the contribution that the member from the Coventry South has made here, and in our words, may Allah make it easy for you. And can I also say, in the main chamber right now, we've got the debate of the legacy of Joe Cox going on, and my honourable friend mentioned what happened during Batley and the kind of divisive attitudes we had from different quarters, in particularly from some people around Islamophobia during the time. And it's a shame we can't, I wanted to be in that debate and I couldn't, and I'm sure many others would. But let's not forget the words of Jo Cox, even for this chamber, even for this Westminster Hall, that we have more in common than that which divides us. Madam Chair, we are here today because this government has failed British Muslims. Prior to 2018, the government disregarded the need for a definitive definition of Islamophobia altogether. Having come to its senses in May 2019, the government was happy to accept a definition, just not the one that the Muslim communities supported. Instead, in May 2019, the government proposed to appoint 2 independent advisers on Islamophobia in search of their own definition. 845 days later, with only 1 nominal Islamophobia adviser and no definition, it is clear that this is not a matter of the government not trying, it is a matter of a government not caring. Time and again, I have raised the fact that if it is absolutely okay for women to understand and define patriarchy and feminism, for Jewish people to define anti-Semitism, for people of colour to define racism, and for LGBTQ plus communities to define homophobia, why will this government again not adopt a definition of Islamophobia rooted in British Muslim communities? 75 academics and over 750 Muslim organisations and institutions have endorsed this definition, from the Muslim Council of Britain to the British Muslims for Secular Democracy, including organisations representing every single sect of Islam. Madam Chair, in my adult life, I have never seen an issue in the Muslim community have such widespread formal support as this definition has. And yet, whilst the government rejects this definition, is it telling me and this chamber and the House the definition of the government aims to bring forward will also be able to garner the support from Muslim communities? Really? My party, the Labour Party, has adopted the APP definition. Labour councils, we've also written out Labour councils to follow suit by adopting it on a local level. The Liberal Democrats, the SNP, the Greens and even the Scottish Conservatives have adopted the definition, and yet this government feels it can silence Muslim communities by rejecting the definition that they support. The last time this debate took place in the chamber, the government's concerns on the APPG definition of Islamophobia centred on the opinions in a leaked letter to Downing Street by the police chiefs, insinuating it would hinder UK counter-terrorism efforts. Yet, upon further investigation, both the police chiefs, Martin Hewitt and Neil Basu, concluded that the definition does not in any way affect counter-terrorism efforts. It was this ludicrous claim about the definition that the former member of Beaconsfield and former Attorney General described as total and unadulterated rubbish. Additionally, it has been repeatedly noted by the APPG and experts that the working definition of Islamophobia proposed is a non-legally binding definition and therefore presents no challenge to statute, which takes legal precedent and therefore does not impede on free speech as the government claims. The APPG definition of Islamophobia is a working definition in the same way as the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism is. In fact, the APPG definition is built upon the IHRA framework. Every single example used part of the APPG definition comes from the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism. So I ask the government, if one definition does not impede free speech, then why does another, which is built on the very same framework? And if the APPG definition does contravene the Equalities Act of 2010, as the government has previously suggested, then why doesn't the government publish the legal advice it has taken on holding such positions? The fact is, the government maintains this silence as hate crimes targeted as Muslims can exceed 50%. The government turns a blind eye to the qualified, educated Muslim women denied jobs. The government benefits from Muslim contribution to the pandemic. And need I remind this government, over 50% of a doctor's fatalities from COVID have been Muslim. Yet ignores the Islamophobia 81% of medical professionals face. The government allows social media to perpetuate narratives of terrorism around Muslims while failing to call out 1 out of 3 articles that misrepresent and generalise Muslims. the government delays a timely and imperative definition as a 2019 YouGov poll finds 45% of British people described a fundamental clash between Islam and the values of British society, whilst the government allows 73% of complaints from with its own party to relate to Islamophobia. This is not a matter of a government not trying, this is a matter of a government not caring. But if for everyday Islamophobia based by British Muslims is not enough to shake this government into action, if the denied nursery place for the daughter of a Muslim Scottish health minister because of a Muslim-sounding name, or even a young Sikh boy wearing a turban being called a Taliban and racially attacked for being perceived as a Muslim isn't enough, then I say to the government the terror attacks that have taken place against Muslim communities should wake you up. Mohammed Salim, Mohsin Ahmed, Makram Ali are the 3 grandfathers that have already been murdered in Islamophobic terror attacks across the UK. Across the world, we have witnessed 51 Muslims murdered by far-right terrorists in Christchurch, New Zealand. And only this June, we witnessed a terror attack that led to 3 generations of a single family being murdered in Ontario, Canada. It has been a decade since Baroness Varsi, the former Conservative Party chair, said Islamophobia had passed the dinner table test. We have seen a year-on-year increase in not only Islamophobic sentiments online, in the media and across society, but the terrifying rise of attacks on Muslim communities. When I say all the evidence points at a government not caring, I'm not saying this merely in opposition, but I say this because, God forbid, if there is another deadly terror attack on Muslims in the UK, this government's inaction, negligence and often silent condoning of Islamophobia will be partly responsible. When you deny Muslim communities even a simple definition of Islamophobia and halt the work of the government's own anti-Muslim hatred working group, it is that serious. And if the Minister disagrees, then I'm happy to let him intervene to tell the House when was the last time the government's anti-Muslim hatred working group actually met. Please do tell us. Who are the 2 independent Islamophobia advisers, and whether the one adviser the government appointed has even started his role, 2 years on from being appointed to the role. No. Just as I thought. The reality is Islamophobia is widespread. A report by the Centre for Media Monitoring analysing media output over a 3-month period in the Q4 of 2018, comprising analysis of over 10,000 published articles and broadcast clips, found 59% of all articles associated with Muslims with negative behaviour. 37% of articles in right-leaning and religious publications were categorised with the most negative rating of very biased. Over a third of all articles misrepresented or generalised about Muslims, and terrorism was the most common theme. Recent research by Professor Imran Awan and Dr. Irene Zempi found whether one-off events or a series of repeated and targeted offending. Islamophobic hate crimes can affect not only the victim, but can send reverberations through communities as they reinforce established patterns of bias, prejudice and discrimination. In the British context, Islam and Muslims have increasingly been seen to be culturally dangerous and threatening the British way of life. Muslims have been labelled as both deviant and evil. We know and we witnessed through the height of a pandemic how untrue these sentiments are. When the nation needed communities to come together, to serve, to unite and protect our nation, British Muslims played a leading role. But sadly, far-right extremists and Islamophobic stereotypes are peddling the narratives that can lead to worrying consequences for Muslim communities. Adopting a definition is only the first step. Preventing, tackling and challenging Islamophobia is a debate that still needs to take place. Chair, neither me nor British Muslims, nor the British Muslims here today or in my constituency are asking for special treatment from this government. All we're asking simply is that the government accepts a definition so we can help people and better understand Islamophobia, so we can put out a political statement that Islamophobia in all its forms is unacceptable and that attacks on Muslims must stop. That's all we're asking for. That, literally, it's just equality. This isn't a change of law or Muslims asking for extra protection in the law, but simply for the government to recognise Islamophobia, accepting a non-binding working definition and making a political statement to that effect. This is why I end with asking this government to end the discriminatory behaviour towards Muslims. Accept the definition, and let's all work together to tackle racism, prejudice and hatred in all its forms. Thank you.
Ooh, I call Khalid Mahmood.
Thank you, Mrs. Murray. It's a privilege, as always, to serve and to speak under your stewardship. And I would like to start the debate thanking the two honourable members for putting for this debate and members that have spoken before, but particularly my young colleague here who is my constituent, or was my constituent, so family still remain to be my constituents. And the heartfelt issue that she has raised, and the fact that we have a member of parliament here who feels so moved by the hate that she has received here today. It is absolutely disgraceful that we serve in this parliament in this day and age, and the media that allows this sort of behaviour to take place. And the government needs to look at how we deal with that sort of media.
Absolutely.
And it's absolutely crucial to that. And I commend my honourable friend, and I hope that she continues in the vein that she has already started, because she'll be a wonderful member of parliament representing the interests of her constituency. Mrs. Murray, my issue here today, and I think has already the movers and particularly the honourable lady from Bradford West has said, this definition is non-binding. That is not good enough for me. That is not good enough for Zara. Sorry, the honourable member for Coventry South. That is not good for all those people who get affected by continued Muslim hatred. That is not good enough for us. In this day and age, we in this place are here. Every day that we vote and go through those lobbies is to vote for legislation. We have a right to protect our citizens. That is what we're here for. We can talk as much as we want to, but the real issue for us being here, and this is what this great democratic institution allows us to do, is to day in to make that legislation. The definition Islamophobia, I have issue, and I've made that clear to people for a long time. The issue is that in 1997, the Runnymede Trust referenced Islamophobia, although their first term was anti-Muslim prejudice, which would align itself with anti-Semitism. What we're really trying to do is discuss the issue of the hatred, which should be a legal requirement, which we put into legislation for us to deal with, and for people who are committed of that to deal with that. And that is really what I'm here to speak about. The irony of the Runnymede Trust and the first definition of Islamophobia is that the chairman of the Runnymede Trust at the time that was put forward was one Mr. Trevor Phillips, who's currently, I believe, still under investigation for the definition Islamophobia that we have now adopted. So I think a bit of a irony there as far as that's concerned. The term Islamophobia suggests... Of course I will.
I'm grateful for the honourable member for giving way. Might I just point out that my understanding is I think it would be very wrong for us to comment on any individual investigations, and in particular, from my understanding, it has nothing to do with the definition, and from my understanding of the individual referred to, it is what is quoted in the press is very, very clear that as the member of Coventry South has pointed out, that this is somebody who said that Muslims have a different view to us all, not the definition in question. Would he agree with me?
Well, no, I wouldn't, because the honourable member has just got up and said that she would not discuss the individual case, and then proceeds to do the very thing that she said that we shouldn't do. So I think really we need to look at that in much more detail. And certainly I wish to discuss the substance of the case. I just merely pointed out that who's going through what and the history of the particular individual is the issue that I raised. The term Islamophobia suggests this could be a medical term, phobia being used. Medical phobias include tomophobia, which is fear of medical procedures, hemophobia, fear of blood, Chinophobia, which is fear of needles. Dentophobia, fear of dentists. A lot of people have that. And nosophobia, which is fear of getting sick.
What about homophobia and transphobia?
Well, of course, yes. I haven't finished my list, but if you, I'm grateful to the lady for adding those as well, and I'm sure the record would make those. Homophobia and transphobia is what the lady from Bradford West has just mentioned. So thank you for completing my list. If Islamophobia is then being suggested as a medical fear, then the term Islamophobia will be acceptable. If not, as it seems, this terminology is incorrectly used by this to mean Islamophobia, then the correct term would be anti-Muslim hatred, racism, or Muslim hatred, which clearly defines on the basis that this has been done. The actual definition which has been put forward is Islamophobia in any distinction from exclusion, restriction, towards or against Muslim that has the purpose or effect of nullifying or impairing the recognition, enjoyment, exercise on an equal footing, also of human rights and fundamental freedoms to the political, economic, social, cultural, and other fields. When we are talking about Muslims, as it's already been said, have been used by companies when they have Muslim-sounding names. The honourable member and the opposition leading this debate mentioned this. And so that is what we want to get away from. So the only way we'll get away from that is as we do with the Race Relations Act, is to have definitions that are purely actionable in terms of Muslim hatred. That is what we want to look at. That is what we're here for to do. We're not here to have discussions for people to accept, which has no real translatable meaning, which we cannot act upon. If you want to serve our constituents and the issues in terms of Muslim hatred that they go through, then we should pin it down. Then we should make it clear that if you do this, somebody will call on your door and deal with this. If you do this through social media, somebody will look you up and call you to account. So this is what the definition is. This is what we want to do, is to have a definition that actually works, a definition that actually delivers for our people. Not a definition which claims a fear of, because I never agreed with this definition. And that is my reason for not agreeing with this definition. So I think we should push the government, of course we should, of putting that definition directly into case. I have two learned colleagues here from Bradford East and from Bolton South, I believe, who have both been barristers and would, I'm sure, if they were to look at this in far more detail, would actually find that much more appropriate way of leaning forward and trying to resolve this issue. I don't know why the Honourable Lady on the opposition side is not shaking her head, because what we want to do is we have law to be able to prosecute people who have racist tendency towards Muslims. That's what I want. I don't want excuses. I'm happy to give way if she wishes to.
I thank the Honourable Gentleman for giving me way. I was actually just sort of moving my head. I wasn't kind of agreeing or disagreeing. But on the point about prosecution, yes, we do have laws already in place, but that doesn't detract us away from the fact the definition of Islamophobia needs to be made. And I, as a barrister, would say, if you're asking my legal opinion, I would say, yes, we do need this definition.
I'll continue. Just in answering that, I would just say to the Honourable Lady, as a barrister, is that if you go in basis of a phobia, and I explain to you what phobias there are, it is usually used in a medical term, not in a legal prosecutorial form. The government has to define this, and we have to define this in legal terms. And that's what's important. For the last time, and I won't carry on.
Language develops over the years, and language and words change and are culturalized. It doesn't stay static forever.
It is not static at all. Of course the language develops. I'm fully aware of that. But the language we have to use in Parliament for this, which has been established for over 500 years in this place, that we do this based on precedents in this country, and that's what we've done, and that's what we'll continue to do, formulating our laws based on precedents to that. I'll give my honourable gentleman for Manchester Gorton.
Thank you. Can I just say, just to help our member on this matter, the APPG, the British Muslims, actually had a number of lawyers engaged in this, and myself, I'm also a lawyer, just for your assistance on that matter, and including the former Attorney General of this country who had also gone through this. So I'm not sure why you were too concerned with this, as those lawyers had not been engaged. They have been.
Well, I thank the honourable member for Manchester Gorton again for his words of wisdom. But I will say to him again, and I did say this to the former Attorney General in the debate that we had in the chamber, whether I did not believe what he said, what he intended to write. And he accepted that because he said he didn't have enough time to look at that, to do that. So I actually agree with you. And I think the gentleman, I think, again, is trying to fight a battle which I'm not opposing. What I'm saying is it has to be done properly in statute. That's what we're here to do, and that is the real thing that I want to do, and that's what's important. Using the word phobia is going to damage us. It's not going to allow us to get the issues that we want. I want there to be a law against social media, law that affects my honourable friend Coventry South, sorry, because it affects her. I want a law in place for the social medias to be able to deal with that. I want law for somebody who's trying to not deliver the service for my constituents, and is doing that because the name that they carry. I want a law that deals with people who are trying to get a particular recognition for work that they do, not to be because of the name that they carry, the religious name that they carry, being a Muslim. I'd want no discrimination against them. And we can formally attract that, we can formally log that, we can formally do that, and we can formally receive that. I am fed up of just having words. We're here to legislate, Madam Chairman, and that's precisely what I want to do, is to be able to do that, we are able to do that. So please, let's not continue.
I'm just perplexed to really understand his argument. I do understand that the honourable member wishes to legislate, on this matter, but how is having a definition accepted by the government going to stop this? I don't understand how these two things are at odds with each other.
What I'm saying is the government can adopt it, and I think the government should adopt it, actually, because I think it means nothing. And essentially the point I'm making is the very point that the Honourable Gentleman said. What I want to do is to put it into the statute so we can continue to deal with this properly and effectively, legally, to deter those people who continue to abuse people based on their religion, on being Muslims in this country. My great-grandfather served in the British Army. My great-grandfather and my grandfather served in the British Merchant Navy. We have a right because we are Muslims and we are proud of being Muslims in this country. And all I want for our children and my grandchildren to be protected by the same legislations and not be Muslims. So thank you.
The honourable gentleman, if he could perhaps come to a conclusion now, because other people...
I appreciate that. I'm doing that. I had so many people who were so interested, Madam Chairman, that wanted to intervene on me. I apologise for that. And so therefore I conclude, Madam Chairman, the issue really here is that I want Muslims to be put on an equal footing through legislation so they are protected legally by us here in this Parliament. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you. Imran Hussain.
Thank you.
Before you do speak, I intend calling the front bench spokesman at about 5:02. So if you could, and there is one other speaker, so if you could perhaps bear that in mind when you're speaking. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. The difficulty I have is I cannot do any justice to this debate in 2 minutes, so please do bear with me. I certainly won't be as long as the previous speaker, that much I can assure you. Madam Chair, I want to first of all start by thanking the honourable members for bringing this very important and pertinent debate here today, and I want to thank all individuals and campaign groups who bravely fight to raise awareness of Islamophobia and to tackle it in our society on a daily basis. And I want to firstly start by also thanking Bradford Council for Mosques, who this week celebrated a proud 40 years of serving our communities. And I want to take this moment to commend their work, their commitment and their leadership, not just in Bradford, but on a regional level. Madam Chairman, I sadly cannot speak in this debate without feeling a deep sense of frustration and disappointment, because since we last debated this issue, Islamophobia has continued to run rife in our society. It has continued to blight our communities, and it sadly hasn't got any better. Indeed, the campaign group Tell Mama last year reporting that the UK had seen a rise of almost 700% in Islamophobic incidents. Now let's take a minute just to take that in. 700% rise over a specific period. And this is borne out by the sickening stories that people tell me of Muslim men, women and even children of all ages in my constituency and across the country who are still facing Islamophobic attacks and Islamophobic persecution on a daily basis, who are still subject to vile abuse because of their religion, who are still told to go home even in the very town that they were born and raised. And, you know, at this point, I think it's a sad day, Madam Chair, when we have the Honourable Member for Coventry South reduced to tears for merely trying to do her job. The Honourable Member coming here and telling this House, as one of the youngest members, that she feels she's unable to carry out her job as a Member of Parliament, as a democratically elected Member of Parliament, is shocking, disgusting, and we must all hang our heads in shame over this appalling treatment of her and other members like her. Madam Chair, the issue here at the heart of this is the normalisation of Islamophobia in our society. I accept the definition. I'm not going to get into any debates about a definition or non-definition. The reality is the vile poison that has spread. We have seen the creation of a culture which tells people that it's acceptable to discriminate against, to persecute, to abuse Muslims because everyone else seems to be doing it. It has spread because it's been actively promoted in the rhetoric espoused in the media and by countless public figures who reinforce over and over again false narratives that Muslims are dangerous and second-class citizens in our society. It's spread because it's been pushed and endorsed even by our own politicians, even by the Prime Minister, who thinks it's okay to describe Muslim women as letterboxes and as bank robbers, as well as by many others who are in the public eye, talking down Muslims, treating us as policing and social problem and promoting divisive policies that disproportionately target Muslims, such as Prevent. It has spread, Madam Chair, because society has normalised it, and that is the real problem here. Indeed, this normalisation of Islamophobia has now reached a point that it's become so commonplace and trivialised, even if we don't see an active discrimination against Muslims that manifests in the most extreme way as violence and as a vitriolic hatred by racists and bigots. We still experience a bias against us that sees Muslims denied employment opportunities, taken less seriously and talked down to because it has now become so endemic and so institutionalised that it has become subconscious discrimination. This normalisation is therefore just a big threat, as big threat as the far right, because it creates an atmosphere in which these far right thugs and fascists feed an environment which they feel welcome and which their bigoted Islamophobia can flourish unchallenged. Madam Chair, I'm looking at the clock. I have quite a lot to say, but I am going to cut that short because of your request and the request for your position. The last thing I will say is this. If we are serious about tackling Islamophobia, we must move on, and this is where I do agree with the point that was made earlier. We must move on from the definition. We've spent the last 2 years talking about a definition that hasn't stopped Islamophobia, and the point that's made is unless we have a definition that is in legislation, because at the moment, when these matters go to a judge in the courtrooms, they are not obliged to take this a mitigating factor. If they so wish, they can take into account. We need to legislate against this, which I think the point the Honourable Member earlier was making. So we must stop talking about it. We must start acting to stop religiously and racially motivated hate in legislation, and acting as a society to challenge and tackle the vile and appalling normalisation of Islamophobia. Thank you.
And 3 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. 2 years ago, we had a general debate on Islamophobia in which I delivered the Labour Party's position. Sadly, 2 years later, no progress has been made and the government has failed to take any action on Islamophobia. The APPG on British Muslim has worked tirelessly on creating this definition. My colleagues before have already touched on the detail of acceptance of this definition. Now, many councils have also accepted it. 800 Muslim organizations have accepted it. Almost all political parties have accepted it, including the Scottish Conservative Party. However, 2 years later, the Tory party has shown that they are in pure denial over Islamophobia through their refusal to accept the definition proposed by the APPG, the failure to conduct an independent investigation and appoint a government advisor on the issue, all of which they promised. What concerns me is that the Tory party has an institutional problem and frankly does not care about Islamophobia. The damning Singh review earlier this year revealed institutional failings within the Conservative Party in how it handled Islamophobia complaints. The review failed to engage with any Conservative Muslim parliamentarians and did not even acknowledge or mention the term Islamophobia. After a definition as such widespread community support, can I ask the Minister why the government is insistent on reinventing the wheel? Let me tell you why. I know the Conservative Party does not care about Islamophobia. After writing to the Prime Minister during Islamophobia Awareness Month, urging him to take action and meet with me and key Muslim organizations, I never received a response. It has been 10 months. Perhaps I can try again during this year's Islamophobia Awareness Month. The UK is home to 2.7 million Muslims, but Islamophobia is on the rise and can have distressing and real-life implications for our Muslim community. A primary example is the far-right peddling false narrative during this pandemic that the British Muslims were spreading corona. As a result, Muslim communities have suffered a shocking 40% increase in online Islamophobia during this period, according to Telmama. The government's own figures also once again reveal Muslims have been victims to the highest proportion of all hate crimes committed this year. The ugly face of right-wing racism reared its head in the horrific attack on Ontario, Canada, a sobering reminder that Islamophobia can kill. Here in the UK, we have seen the chilling results of Islamophobia too. Just this week, a young Muslim student in Rotherham was repeatedly punched and kicked by fellow students, leaving him hospitalized. These are not isolated incidents. Home Office data supports this and shows the referral to Prevent for extreme right-wing ideology have exponentially increased. I, along with colleagues, have pushed for an independent review of the Prevent strategy for several years. A coalition of more than 450 Islamic organizations, including 350 mosques and imams, representing thousands of British Muslims, voice and have boycotted the government's review of Prevent in protest against the appointment of William Shawcross as its chair. Shawcross has openly expressed hostile views of Islam and Muslims, including, and I quote, "Yes, the problem is Islamic fascism." Will the minister urgently outline why the government has appointed someone with Islamophobic views? Will he also respond to the overwhelming discontent over Shawcross' appointment? And will he put on record why the government refuses to engage with Muslim Council Britain, the largest Muslim organization in the UK? And finally, Madam Chair, as a chair of the Labour Muslim Network and vice chair of the APPG on British Muslim, I reaffirm my commitment to tackling Islamophobia, and I hope that the minister today finally will endorse the definition and pledge to take action. Thank you.
Thank you. Kirsten SNP spokesman.
It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship, and I'm so grateful to the honourable members for Peterborough and Bradford West for securing this debate and for their excellent speeches and all the excellent speeches today. As an officer of the APPG on British Muslims, I'm always struck in that group by what a fantastically constructive cross-party space that is. We have got much to be positive about in terms of that collective purpose and determination. But I'm afraid that that's just as well, because there is so much to do and a great distance to travel. Some people have asked me why we need to define Islamophobia. And I think we need to do that because we have to be clear what we're talking about, what's unacceptable and why. We cannot effectively deal with Islamophobia if we are not confident and others are not confident of what it means. And that matters because we need to develop that understanding more widely. People need to know what Islamophobia is, why that's a problem, how does it manifest itself, and absolutely vital, what is the impact on numerous, far too numerous individuals in our communities of leaving this terrible stain on our society untackled? And we heard about the figures from Tel Mama of an increase of 700% in Islamophobic incidents. That is horrendous, and I sincerely hope the UK government is listening. And it's uncomfortable, maybe, confronting that reality, that society, even now, especially now, is Islamophobic and is intolerant. But we need to acknowledge that if we can hope to drive forward change. And that's why we need the UK government to step up and shape up. I was pleased to receive an email recently from Peter Hopkins of Newcastle University, who authored a powerful report into Islamophobia in Scotland, working with the Scottish Parliament cross-party group. And honourable members will, I suspect, be used to me patiently explaining how Scotland is a brilliant place, and it is, of course, and I'm so proud to represent one of the most religiously diverse constituencies in Scotland. But Scotland is not some unique haven of tolerance, and it would be a mistake to suggest that, or to suggest that we uniquely are not affected by Islamophobia. We need to be grown up about this and grown up about our politics, and accepting that this is an issue is vital. I am particularly glad that the Scottish Government has the leadership of Nicola Sturgeon on this, because I know that she is absolutely unflinching on this issue, and that really matters. And we do need to take heart, absolutely, from the people in Kenmure Street in Glasgow who came out of their houses at Eid and stopped the Home Office from deporting their neighbours. So there are things to be positive about, but we also need to look really hard at ourselves and recognise the reality that there remains much progress to be made. For me, that's a big driver in my support of independence, that opportunity to have a society where equality and respect and fairness are the building blocks of a country. But as we move there, we need to act, and that's why the adoption of this definition and action matters. I had a very useful meeting recently, along with the Honourable Member for Ross, Skye and Lochaber, with Zara Mohammed, the new General Secretary of the Muslim Council of Britain. She's the first Scot, the first young person, and the first woman to hold that role. And Zara is focused, among many other things, on the dearth of Muslim women in particular in public life. And she's absolutely right. We need far greater diversity, in particular where it would be most visible. The higher reaches of public bodies, leadership roles, politics. And although I'm very pleased that the Scottish Parliament is looking much more diverse this session, and I applaud all parties who contributed to making it so, with particular mention to my colleague Kokab Stewart, the new MSP for Glasgow Kelvin and the first Muslim woman elected to Holyrood, there remains a great deal to do. And Zara's work will make a difference in that. And it is clear that women, in particularly, are disproportionately impacted by Islamophobia in many ways. So I think there's two issues that we can reflect on there. One is that if we accept detriment to any minority group, we are opening the doors to detriment to others. Intersectionality is important, and as the Honourable Member for Coventry South said in her very important speech, that interrelationship between different equality groups is important, as is the relationship, I would say, between different religious groups. The same day that I met Zara Mohammed, I also met representatives from the Glasgow Jewish Representative Council and the Scottish Council of Jewish Communities. These communities too have very understandable concerns about anti-Semitism, but we're very keen to discuss working with Muslim colleagues and shared concerns regarding Islamophobia and the impact on all our communities of this intolerance. Because the intolerance is increasing. That normalising that we heard about from the Honourable Gentleman is increasing. There's a nasty, dark underbelly of bile, which is enabled by right-wing populists like Trump and Farage, but they're not alone. And it contributes here and further afield to that othering and mistreatment of Muslims. And I have to reflect again on the absolutely disgraceful comments by the Prime Minister about Muslim women looking like letterboxes. These comments will have contributed to countless hardships and worse. It should not have happened. It's completely indefensible, and I struggle to understand how people can defend it. Because our governments need to be alive to this issue, they need to be focused on this issue. Political parties likewise. I'm pleased the Scottish Government's taken this seriously. I'm pleased the SNP Westminster Group adopted the definition of Islamophobia. But this is not political, or it shouldn't be political. This should be about being part of a decent society, one to which our Muslim communities contribute immensely in Scotland, in the UK, and of course further afield. And before I conclude, because I feel that people may wish to make use of their time, and it's important that we hear what the Minister has to say. There are so many groups in my local area, Muslim groups, who do really important work in our communities, and we heard about all of the amazing contributions made during the pandemic, but I'd like to put on record the immense work that the Ahmadiyya Muslim community in Scotland did to support people in need during the really difficult periods of the pandemic, also the Alul Bayt Society, and the vital support that congregations like those in the Wood Farm Education Centre and Langrig Road in my constituency offer to the constituency day in and day out. So I'll conclude, Chair, by pointing out, as others have done, that this is a big issue. It's an issue across the world, but we need to start here in looking closely at ourselves. The fact that it's a big issue is all the more reason for us to take our positions in this Parliament seriously and use them to drive forward change so that we can better challenge wherever there is Islamophobia. We can't carry on as we are, and part of that is recognising from the UK government perspective that adopting a definition of Islamophobia is not only an important thing to do, but it's an increasingly urgent thing to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs Murray. It's a great pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. Can I congratulate the honourable members for Peterborough and Bradford West for obtaining this really urgent and timely debate, and also to all my honourable colleagues who have spoken in the debate today. I think it's been an absolutely sterling debate. But I particularly want to mention what the honourable member for Coventry South was saying. I don't know if it will help her, but many of us Muslim women have been abused in a very similar format as well. I've had emails and on social media people saying to me that I quote the word F and then B, and I should be sent off to Saudi Arabia to be raped, and all these kind of interesting choices of words being used and letters written. So, you know, it doesn't help, but I hope that you'll understand. Islamophobia has been rising in this country and in the Western world at a very disturbing rate in the recent years. Yet, despite this, as we've heard today, there is still no accepted definition of Islamophobia. There are over 3 million Muslims in the United Kingdom, almost 5% of our overall population. But despite having a presence in this country, as far back as the 16th century, many Muslims believe they are treated as the other. Islamophobia permeates all domains of our society. It threatens education, it limits employment prospects, and impacts everyday issues, including health, well-being, and housing. So isn't it time that we finally address this issue? In 2019, the APPG on British Muslim worked tirelessly to create an Islamophobic definition. This was widely applauded and supported by over 750 organisations. And as has been mentioned in the debate, it's been adopted by the Labour Party, the Liberal Democrats, Plaid Cymru, the Scottish National Party, the Mayors of London and Greater Manchester. And it's been debated in this House as well and has received cross-party support. So it is disappointing that 2 years later, we're still urging the government to do the right thing. From this government, this is an absolute denial. To add insult to injury, they can't even bring themselves to use the term Islamophobia. In May, the Singh report, an independent investigation into the handling of Islamophobia by the Conservative Party, was published. It was a damning indictment of the discrimination rife in the party. It found that Islamophobia is a serious issue for it and that the concerns had too easily been denied or dismissed. Indeed, it even looked at the Prime Minister's comments, which we heard a lot about women wearing burqas like letterboxes and robbers. And it was found that Islamophobic incidents of hate rose by 375% in the week after the Prime Minister made those comments. The report called for the party leadership to publish an action plan to set out how it would tackle the failings they found. Will the Minister today acknowledge the scale of the problem? Can he update us on what progress his party has made on the action plan and a new code of conduct? Indeed, in my party, I would like to pay tribute to the work of the Labour Muslim Network, who brought to our attention its findings and concerns on Islamophobia. And unlike the leadership of the party opposite, we are seriously committed to tackling and eradicating Islamophobia, both within our party and society. We're often told by critics of the APPG's definition that it should not imply that some Islamophobia is rooted in racism, yet the evidence says otherwise. Last year, the largest number of referrals to the government prevent programs related to far-right extremism. And indeed, the Security Minister warned that far-right terror posed a growing threat. And we all know the consequences of that ideology. A recent report by Hope Not Hate found Islamophobia has become the driving force behind the rise of far-right movements in the UK, and that anti-Muslim prejudice has replaced immigration as a key driver of such groups. A poll carried out found that 35% of Britons thought that Islam was generally a threat to the British way of life. And we see this happening globally, and particularly in Western Europe as well, where there has been a rise of the far-right political parties and discriminatory laws being passed in countries like France and others. Early this year, a UN expert concluded that the UN Human Rights Council, that globally they has reached epidemic proportions, with Muslims often targeted based on visible characteristics such as names, skin colour, and clothing. Many, including this government, argue that Muslims are not a race. Yes, of course they are not a race, but they have been racialized where they are treated as having characteristics that mark them as wholly different. The question of racism is whether there's a set of attitudes and behaviours that are socially widespread and used to justify discrimination against a particular group, which is why it makes sense to call anti-Semitism and Islamophobia a form of racism. I am the chair of the APPG on religion in media, and last year we conducted an inquiry into religious literacy in the British media. Our report found that the media reporting can be sensationalist, that it reinforces stereotypes and contributes towards discriminatory attitude. Headlines like 1 in 5 Brit Muslim support for jihadis, or the reference to Muslim problems, they have real-world consequences. Of course, journalists should be able to question, criticize religion. We live in a democracy that values freedom of speech. But this isn't about censorship. This is about transparency. And one of the things we would ask you to consider the government is to look at the press regulation, because the current system of self-press regulation isn't working. And so I asked the Minister, does he at least accept the unescapable reality that Islamophobia has damaging consequences for the life chances and equalities enjoyed by British Muslim communities? There are people in the UK who feel scared to leave their homes for fear of verbal or physical attack. People who are withdrawing from public services with the devastating knock-on consequences on their health and education, and they feel they are outsiders in their own country. This should shame us all. Last year, in the other place, when the government was asked about the progress it had made on adopting a definition, it said, the definition proposed by the APPG was not compatible with the Equality Act 2010, which treats race and religion separately and could have consequences for free speech. Can the Minister tell us whether he has published any evidence, or the government, any evidence for public scrutiny regarding the legal advice received which suggests that the APPG definition is incompatible with the Equality Act 2020? It has been repeatedly noted by experts that the working definition of Islamophobia proposed is a non-legally binding definition and therefore presents no challenges to statute which takes legal precedent. So can I ask the Minister today not to revert to the predictable, rehearsed responses and platitude that we've heard from the government? Because each time they do that, they're showing their disdain for the British Muslim community. In this context of this debate, the ask is simple. Here is a definition that has been accepted by cross-party MPs, national groups, hundreds of organisations to adopt this definition. And in some respect, I agree with the Honourable Member for Birmingham Paribas. We need a definition because I think that will be a starting point to actually address the real issues that we're facing in this country about Islamophobia. And it's not just rising in the United Kingdom, it's in rise in France, in Austria, and other parts of the Western world as well, where Muslims are being treated as if they're fifth colonists, as they don't belong in this society. And I referred earlier to our inquiries about the covering in the media. I, for one, and I'm sure nobody here wants to restrict free speech, but I think what we would ask the government to look at is when the newspapers and others publish pure lies. There's a difference between covering something, and there's a difference between actually carrying blatant lies, like the 1 in 5, or that case we had of the Sunday Times newspaper covering about a Muslim family that had adopted a child in the East End of London, and it turned out that the story was completely made up. It's those kinds of things that cause people to view Muslims with suspicion. It is those kinds of stories that cause people to lead towards hatred towards Muslims. Because let's face it, a lot of people will never probably meet a Muslim person in their lives. Their understanding what a Muslim is, what they read in the newspaper, or what they watch on the television. And therefore, what our media, social media, press, and others say is important part of this debate as well. Of course.
I thank the Honourable Lady, and she makes a real valuable and pertinent point. Would she agree with me that the situation is far worse? We now see Islamic tropes increasing under the guise of freedom of speech. And would she agree that freedom of speech is not an absolute right? It does not give you a right to promote hatred, and it certainly doesn't give you carte blanche right to attack Muslims.
Absolutely.
I'm just going to say I entirely agree with the Honourable Member, and so I just want to say is I hope that the Minister has heard and takes on board the points and issues that have been raised in the debate today. And I look forward to his response.
Minister, if I can remind the Minister to leave a couple of minutes at the end for Mr Bristow.
I'll proceed as quickly as I possibly can, Madam Chair. And it is indeed, Mrs Murray, a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and I congratulate the Honourable Member for Bradford West and the Honourable Member for Peterborough for securing this debate. I just wanted to begin by saying that, unfortunately, the Honourable Member for Coventry South and I guess, agree on nothing politically, but I admire her so tremendously. We've done the local politics programme in the West Midlands together. It's always a pleasure to be on the programme with her, and I can only imagine that she is a true inspiration to women of all political persuasions to come into politics. So I think whatever abuse she may suffer from a bunch of idiots, basically, she's reaching far more people in terms of being an inspiration, and she should take heart in that. With regard to my own experiences, I am blessed in my constituency to be aided by two excellent Muslim councillors who are true community representatives. Councillor Ghazali and Councillor Amo Hussain do tremendous work across their ward, across all demographics and with people of all faiths and none, and it's a pleasure for me to work with them. And I'm also delighted that Imam Shahid Bashir, the man who gifted me a copy of the Quran and has taken some time to explain parts of it to me. It's a bit of an ongoing project in terms of my education, but I'm incredibly grateful for his kindness and his patience in doing that. So the point of mentioning this is that people learn by experience, I feel, and when they experience members of the Muslim community, they see the tremendous work that they do within the community, and I think that's to everybody's credit, and that's how we will build a better society. I will, of course...
He's reminded me that I did a terrible thing. I failed to acknowledge the great plethora of Conservative councillors who I have. I said supporters, but of course they're councillors too, and we've had many Conservative Muslim councillors and indeed Labour Muslim councillors in Wickham for a very long time. And I'm extremely grateful, as he is, for all of the brilliant work that they do.
Well, I completely concur with the Honourable Gentleman's comments. So, as a man of faith myself, I firmly believe Muslims in our country should be able to practice their faith in freedom. We've always been clear that this government does not and will not tolerate anti-Muslim hatred in any form and will continue to combat such discrimination and intolerance wherever it occurs. We've instituted some of the strongest legislation in the world to tackle incidents where people incite religious hatred or are engaged in religious-motivated criminal activity. We've also supported Muslim communities in combating anti-Muslim hatred. We're supporting groups fighting anti-Muslim hatred on the ground, including through the Places of Worship Protective Security Funding Scheme, which has supported more than 240 places of worship, with approximately £5 million in grants, enabling them to install measures such as protective alarms, security lighting and access controls. Following the Christchurch attacks, we funded faith associations to run 22 training sessions prior to and during Ramadan to provide advice to mosque leaders on how to improve their security. And in November 2020, we awarded £1.8 million through the MHCLG Faith, Race, Hate Crime Grant Scheme to support established community groups and civil society organisations to run projects to boost shared values and tackle religiously and racially motivated hate crime. We funded work in schools and with the young people, including through the Anne Frank Trust and Solutions Not Sides, two organisations funded through our grant scheme which aim to bring religious communities together to tackle prejudice and discrimination against religious groups from a young age. We've also today announced the Faith New Deal, a pilot fund that will provide £1 million to support faith groups to deliver innovative partnership projects that will benefit communities as they recover from the impact of COVID-19. Now, Madam Chair, the definition proposed by the APPG for British Muslims, whilst well supported, we believe is not fit for purpose, and if adopted, would create significant practical and legal issues. Islam is a religion which includes a wide range of races, and thus stating, as the definition does, that Islamophobia is a type of racism is incorrect and conflates religion with race. These concerns have been raised by the Federation of Student Islamic Societies, the former chairman of the Equality and Human Rights Commission, and the director of the Council for the Advancement of Arab-British Understanding. In fact, a poll by the organisation Muslim Census found that only 21% of Muslims polled agreed with the APB definition, primarily due to the confusion it creates between race and religion. As quoted from their own report, for attacks on Muslims, and Islam to be dealt with appropriately, selecting a definition that the majority of Muslims agree with is vital. The findings of our survey suggest that the APB definition does not have the backing of the community. I will, of course, give one.
I'm grateful for the Minister to give way. I'm really interested to understand the definition that has been accepted by the government, for example, the IHRA, was that unanimously accepted by every single person? Because there's lots of debate on that. And yet, when it comes to this one, there's a debate where the government has said, I'd really value any examples he can point me to about issues when it comes to legalities, given it's a non-legally binding definition.
I thank the Honourable Lady for her intervention, and the definition that she refers to, I'm not sure whether it was completely universally accepted, but it is internationally accepted as a definition, and I think therein lies the difference. A further issue is that, as raised by the former Commissioner for Countering Extremism and the Government's current Independent Advisor for Social Cohesion, the definition does nothing to address the issue of sectarianism or the rights of minority Muslim groups such as Ahmadiyya, such as the Ahmadiyya community, who may receive prejudice from other Muslim communities who do not agree with their views. Finally, the definition suggested may have negative implications on free speech. Concerns have been raised that the lack of clarity in the definition could lead to it being used as a backdoor blasphemy law and provide a shield for Islamists to espouse hatred and criticise or disregard anyone who challenges them as Islamophobic. I'll give way to the Honourable Lady first.
The Minister just referred to, and I'm grateful for the Minister to give him being so kind with his time, the backdoor blasphemy law. Actually, the backdoor blasphemy law, if there is any, is what the Conservative Party is putting through a police and crime bill when you're protecting statues and because of commemorative feelings. That's backdoor blasphemy, not this definition. And I would really like to understand, since when does any definition deal with inter-issues amongst communities? There isn't. It is an absolute. This is like a dead cat on the table. Let's just not adopt this definition. Let's just say to the Muslim community, 750 organisations, more than 60 academics. Does the Minister not agree with me? Actually, from my point of view, this is just a Conservative Party throwing it down the long grass because they don't want to take responsibility and they don't care about Muslims.
Madam Chair, I feel time is against me, unfortunately. So I will say, for all the reasons that I set out earlier in my speech, the actions that have been taken by this government in order to develop community cohesion, to address some of the issues, I'm afraid time will not allow if I'm to conclude. So I just must conclude by saying we remain committed to there being a robust and effective definition, and we will outline our steps to achieve this in due course. So I thank honourable members for the views they've put forward. However, we cannot accept a definition of Islamophobia that shuts down legitimate criticism and debate. Freedom of speech is the foundation of a healthy society, allowing for debate and disagreement underpinned by those values that bind people together: tolerance, equality and fairness. It's important that all have the right to speak freely and provide legitimate criticism.
Paul Bristow, 1 minute to sum up.
Thank you, Chair. Since being elected in 2019, I have heard a few speeches that will remain with me for the rest of my life. The Honourable Member for Coventry South and I will agree on little, but she will find me standing side by side with her in her fight against Islamophobia. I was humbled and I was privileged to listen to that speech. We've had an interesting debate today. I think what's clear, and I hope the Minister takes away, the strength of feeling that people have on this issue and the strength of feeling that the Muslim communities up and down the country have. We've heard some positives about the contribution that Muslim communities have made to this country, and we've heard some negatives, sadly, around Islamophobia, discrimination and racism. And I must say, the Honourable Member for Bradford West and her statements about the Conservative Party, there's a difference between the Conservative Party and the government. And when she conflates those two things, it does her case no justice whatsoever. So I just want to make that absolutely clear. I hope the Minister will have heard very, very clearly the need for this definition. Once that definition is there, we can then move forward together. And it's just a start. We can start rooting out anti-Muslim hatred.
Order. The question is that this House has considered the definition of Islamophobia. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order, order. This sitting stands adjourned.
The proceeding has ended. 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 The proceeding has ended.